Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Intel. My name is Williams, and this is the channel where we uncover the chilling stories behind some of the most haunting tragedies in recent memory. Today, we'll explore a case that shook the city of Atlanta and left an unforgettable impact on all who heard it. The heartbreaking and horrifying story of Shaana and Tiana Ellis. Shaana Ellis was a single mother who, like many, dreamed of building a better life for her daughter, Tiana. Together, they lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Atlanta, a place that should have been their sanctuary. Shaana was hardworking, juggling multiple jobs to make ends meet. Tiana, a bright and introspective teenager, carried the weight of her mother's struggles, yearning for connection in an emotionally fractured household. But their story was far from ordinary. Behind the walls of their home, a tale of manipulation, betrayal, and denial unfolded, leading to an irreversible tragedy that left both lives shattered. On the surface, Shaana seemed to embody resilience, raising Tiana alone after her partner Derek walked out on them. She worked tirelessly to provide a sense of normalcy, but beneath the surface, years of disappointment and emotional vulnerability began to wear her down. It was this vulnerability that opened the door to Marcus Bailey, a man who seemed to offer everything Shaana craved: stability, companionship, and love. Marcus's arrival marked a turning point in the lives of the Ellis family, but not in the way Shaana hoped. As his charm gave way to control and his true nature revealed itself, the cracks in their lives widened. Tiana's voice, soft at first, grew louder as she tried to warn her mother about the man she trusted so completely. But Shaana, desperate to hold on to her dream of happiness, turned a blind eye, setting the stage for an unthinkable outcome. This is not just the story of a crime, it is a story of love, betrayal, and the consequences of ignoring warning signs. Stay with us as we unravel the events that led to the tragic events of March 15, 2023. To understand the tragic events of March 15, 2023, we must go back to the beginning, when Shaana Ellis's life began to fracture under the weight of betrayal, loneliness, and survival. Shaana was only 20 years old when she met Derek Lawson. Bright, hopeful, and filled with dreams of becoming a nurse, she believed Derek was her soulmate. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to promise her a future full of stability and love. But promises can be fleeting, and Derek's affection proved no exception. Just 3 months after the birth of their daughter, Tiana, Derek left. No explanation, no goodbyes, just a silence that left Shaana to pick up the pieces of her shattered dreams. Life as a single mother was relentless. Shaana had to abandon her aspirations of becoming a nurse, instead taking on any work she could find to keep a roof over their heads. During the day, she worked as a cashier at a grocery store. At night, she cleaned offices, her body aching from exhaustion, but her determination unwavering. Bills piled up faster than she could pay them, and there were nights when food on the table was a distant hope rather than a certainty. The weight of her struggles wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Every glance at Tiana, the daughter she loved deeply, reminded her of the life she had lost, the dreams she had set aside and the partner who had abandoned her. Though Shaana tried to shield Tiana from her pain, the cracks began to show. Her patience wore thin, and moments of bitterness seeped into their relationship. What was once a bond of unconditional love became strained, as Shaana's frustrations unintentionally cast a shadow over their home. Tiana, bright and observant even as a child, understood more than Shaana realized. She learned to navigate her mother's moods, to quietly comfort her in subtle ways. A clean kitchen, a completed homework assignment, a cheerful smile to ease her mother's burdens. But even Tiana's quiet resilience couldn't mend the loneliness that grew in Shaana's heart. By her late 20s, Shaana was drowning in isolation. The desire for companionship became an unrelenting ache. She yearned for someone to share the weight of her life, for stability, for love, something she had been denied for so long. But each time she reached out, she was met with disappointment. Her relationships were fleeting and often toxic. Men came into her life with promises, only to leave when the challenges became too great. Each departure deepened her sense of inadequacy, feeding a growing belief that she was unworthy of love. Tiana, watching from the sidelines, felt the impact of these failed relationships. With every man who entered their lives, she saw her mother's fleeting hope and inevitable heartbreak. It was a cycle that left scars on both mother and daughter, a cycle that Shaana, in her desperation, could not break. As Shaana entered her 30s, the toll of her struggles was evident. She had survived, but the cost was immense. She carried the burden of betrayal, loneliness, and resentment. Resentment that, though she didn't realize it, had unfairly extended to Tiana. It was in this vulnerable state that Marcus Bailey entered their lives, a man who would promise her everything she thought she needed, but whose presence would ultimately lead to unimaginable tragedy. By the summer of 2019, Shaana Ellis was 32 years old, exhausted by life but still holding onto the fragile hope that happiness was possible. Her days were consumed by work and responsibilities, and her nights were haunted by loneliness. She had little time for herself and even less for dreams. But everything seemed to change on a warm evening in June when she walked into a small lounge in downtown Atlanta. Encouraged by a co-worker who insisted she needed a break, Shaana reluctantly agreed to a night out. The lounge was unassuming, a dimly lit corner bar with soft music and the hum of casual conversation. Shaana intended to keep to herself, have a single drink, and head home. But fate, or so it seemed, had other plans. Marcus Bailey noticed her the moment she walked in. At 40, he was tall, confident, and magnetic. His laughter carried across the room, drawing people to him effortlessly. Shaana caught his eye, and within moments he was at her side, his charm as disarming as it was undeniable. "Do you always look this serious, or is tonight special?" he asked with a grin, breaking through Shauna's defenses with a simple, playful line. For the first time in years, Shaana found herself smiling. A real unforced smile. Their conversation flowed easily, Marcus asking about her life, her challenges, her dreams. He seemed genuinely interested, a stark contrast to the disinterested men she had encountered in the past. He spoke of his work as a contractor, his plans to start his own business, and his belief in building strong foundations in life. Figuratively and literally, Marcus positioned himself as a man of substance. By the end of the night, Shaana felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that she had finally met someone who could ease her burdens and share her life. Marcus promised her stability, companionship, and a future filled with possibilities. Shaana, starved for connection, believed every word. Within a few months, Marcus had seamlessly integrated himself into Shauna's life. He was attentive and generous, bringing small gifts for both Shaana and Tiana. He helped with household expenses and took Shaana on dates that made her feel cherished, reminding her of the carefree young woman she had once been. By October 2019, Marcus had moved into their modest home, becoming a permanent fixture in their lives. But not everyone was taken in by Marcus's charm. Tiana, just 13 at the time, felt an unease she couldn't quite explain. At first, she tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. She had seen her mother's struggles and knew how much Shaana wanted this relationship to work. Tiana wanted her mother to be happy. However, as time passed, the red flags became harder to ignore. Marcus's charm felt rehearsed, his compliments hollow. He tried to engage Tiana in conversation, asking about school and her interests, but his tone felt forced, as though he were performing a role rather than genuinely caring. Tiana began to notice the way Marcus's presence dominated their home, how he seemed to insert himself into every aspect of their lives. And then there were the lingering looks, subtle but unsettling. Despite her growing discomfort, Tiana chose to remain silent. She didn't want to upset her mother, who seemed happier than she had been in years. For Shaana, Marcus represented everything she had been missing. A partner who provided emotional support and financial relief. Her blind trust in him only deepened as Marcus painted a picture of a brighter future for their family, a future she was desperate to believe in. But beneath his charming facade, Marcus Bailey was far from the savior Shaana believed him to be. His arrival marked the beginning of a sinister descent, one that would transform their home from a place of hope to a prison of fear. As Tiana grew older, Marcus's behavior became more overtly inappropriate, crossing boundaries that should never have been breached. The tension in the Ellis household reached a fever pitch. Yet Shaana remained oblivious, too caught up in her desire to preserve the image of a stable family. It started with the lingering looks that made Tiana feel exposed in her own home. Marcus would sit too close during family dinners, his hand brushing hers under the guise of casual gestures. He would find excuses to enter her room uninvited, his presence suffocating and unwelcome. The comments that had once seemed harmless became more pointed, his tone layered with unsettling undertones. One late evening, while Shaana was at work, Marcus cornered Tiana in the kitchen. She had been trying to keep to herself, finishing an assignment while the house was quiet. But Marcus didn't allow her the solitude she desperately sought. "You've been avoiding me," he said, stepping closer, his tone deceptively light. Tiana didn't look up from her book. "I'm busy," she replied, hoping he would leave. Marcus leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on her. "You're not a little girl anymore, you know," he said, his words hanging in the air like a threat. Tiana froze, her heart pounding. "I need to get back to my homework," she said firmly, trying to stand. But Marcus didn't let her leave. His hand shot out, gripping her arm with a force that made her wince. "You think you're too good to talk to me now?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. Tiana's instinct screamed at her to fight back, to yell for help, but she knew it would be useless. Shaana wasn't there to intervene, and even if she had been, Tiana doubted her mother would believe her. She had tried before, only to be met with dismissal and accusations. That night marked a turning point. Marcus didn't stop at veiled threats and inappropriate comments. He crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He forced himself on Tiana, silencing her protests with a mixture of threats and coercion. "You don't want your mom to know about this, do you?" he whispered, his tone as chilling as his actions. Tiana was left shattered, her sense of safety destroyed. She withdrew even further, spending most of her time locked in her room or at school, where she clung to the few moments of normalcy she could find. But even there, the weight of what had happened followed her, a shadow she couldn't escape. Marcus, emboldened by Shaana's blind trust, continued his abuse in secret. He wielded Shaana's unwavering loyalty like a weapon, using it to keep Tiana silent. "She'll never believe you," he said more than once, a smirk on his face that made her stomach churn. Tiana knew he was right. Every attempt she had made to tell her mother the truth had only driven Shaana further into Marcus's web. Shauna's desperation to hold on to the relationship blinded her to the growing despair in her daughter's eyes. Months passed, and the abuse became a sickening routine. Marcus's control over Tiana was absolute, and her silence became a prison. She lived in constant fear, dreading the nights when Shaana would work late and leave her alone with him. Each encounter left her more broken, the light in her eyes dimming with each passing day. What Tiana didn't yet realize was that the consequences of Marcus's actions were already beginning to manifest in ways that neither of them could ignore. A discovery that would push the fragile balance in their household to its breaking point. By early 2023, Tiana Ellis's world was already a nightmare she couldn't escape. But when she began to notice the changes in her body, the nausea that greeted her every morning, the overwhelming fatigue, and the sudden tightness of her clothes, she knew something was wrong. Each symptom felt like a whisper of a truth she didn't want to face. One afternoon, trembling with fear, Tiana took a pregnancy test in the privacy of the small bathroom she shared with her mother. She stared at the stick in her hands as the seconds dragged into an eternity. When the two faint lines appeared, her heart sank. She was pregnant. Tiana's mind raced with questions and fears. How could this have happened? Of course she knew how. It was Marcus. The thought made her stomach churn with both rage and disgust. But what terrified her more was what would happen next. Could she tell her mother? Would Shaana even believe her after all the dismissals and accusations? She could already hear the denial, the anger, the heartbreak in Shaana's voice. She considered her options, but they all seemed equally impossible. If she kept the pregnancy, how would she raise a child in this house of horrors? If she tried to leave, where would she go? And if she confronted Marcus, she knew he would twist the truth, as he always did, to suit his narrative. Tiana decided to stay silent, hoping to buy time, but the weight of her secret grew heavier with each passing day. Her once lively demeanor at school had become withdrawn and somber. Friends noticed the change, but Tiana brushed off their concerns with weak excuses. She was trapped in her own world of fear and uncertainty, unable to see a way out. Meanwhile, Shaana remained oblivious, consumed by her own struggles and blind faith in Marcus. She didn't notice Tiana's fatigue or the subtle changes in her body. She didn't question why her daughter seemed even quieter than usual. Shaana was too busy clinging to the image of the family she believed she had finally built, unaware that it was crumbling beneath her feet. The fragile illusion shattered one afternoon when Shaana stumbled upon the pregnancy test tucked behind the bathroom sink. She had been cleaning when she noticed it, a small plastic object partially hidden from view. Her heart skipped a beat as she picked it up and turned it over. The sight of the two unmistakable lines made her breath catch in her throat. Confusion quickly turned to fury. The test wasn't hers. That left only one possibility: Tiana. But how? Who? Her mind raced with questions, and as if on cue, the pieces began to fall into place. A sickening thought crept into her mind, one that she immediately tried to push away. But it clung to her, growing louder with every passing second. Shaana stormed into the living room where Marcus was lounging on the couch, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind. "Explain this," she demanded, holding up the test with trembling hands. Marcus looked up, his expression briefly startled before quickly shifting to one of calm calculation. "What is it?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "You know damn well what this is," Shaana snapped. "Tiana's pregnant. How did this happen?" There was a moment of silence as Marcus seemed to weigh his options. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back and shook his head, his face darkening. "I didn't want to tell you this," he began, his tone carefully measured. "But she's been coming on to me for months. I told her it was wrong, but she wouldn't stop." Shaana froze, her breath catching. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus pressed on, his words deliberate and manipulative. "I've been trying to keep this family together, but she's been acting out. She's jealous, Shaana. She doesn't want you to be happy, so she's trying to ruin us." The doubt that had briefly flickered in Shaana's mind was smothered by Marcus's carefully crafted narrative. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. His words planted seeds of anger and betrayal that quickly took root. Shaana's face hardened, her rage no longer directed at Marcus, but at the daughter she believed had betrayed her. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Marcus didn't answer, but the smirk on his face was unmistakable. He had successfully shifted the blame, turning Shaana's love for her daughter into a weapon against her. Shaana marched to Tiana's room, her anger boiling over with every step. The confrontation that followed would be the culmination of years of manipulation, betrayal, and misplaced trust, a tragic breaking point that no one in the Ellis household could return from. Shaana Ellis, consumed by fury and confusion, stormed into her daughter Tiana's room. The pregnancy test clutched in her hand felt like a burning indictment, her mind clouded by Marcus Bailey's manipulative words. Tiana was sitting on her bed, her schoolbook spread out in front of her. She looked up at her mother, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Mom?" she asked cautiously. Shaana's voice was sharp and cold. "Explain this," she said, holding up the pregnancy test like a weapon. Tiana's face paled. She had hoped to buy more time to figure out what to do, but now the truth had come crashing down. I can explain," she stammered, her voice trembling. But Shaana was in no mood to listen. "You've been throwing yourself at Marcus, haven't you?" she accused, her voice rising with anger. "I trusted you, Tiana. I gave up everything for you, and this is how you repay me." Tiana's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "No, Mom, that's not what happened. He's lying to you. Enough!" Shaana snapped, cutting her off. "Do you think I'm stupid? Marcus has done nothing but care for this family, and you've been trying to tear us apart." Tiana's voice broke as she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, you have to believe me. He's the one who—" Shauna's anger exploded. She slapped Tiana, the sound echoing through the small room like a gunshot. "Don't you dare lie to me," she screamed. her face twisted with rage. "You're just like your father, always ruining everything." Tiana staggered back, clutching her cheek. She tried to defend herself, to make her mother see the truth. But Shaana was beyond reason. The years of frustration, betrayal, and manipulation had boiled over, consuming her entirely. Blinded by her rage, Shaana lunged at Tiana. Her hands, trembling with anger, struck again and again, each blow fueled by the pain and bitterness she had carried for years. Tiana cried out, her voice raw with fear and desperation. "Mom, stop, please!" But Shaana couldn't hear her. All she could see was betrayal. Marcus's lies distorting her perception of the daughter she had once cradled with love. Her actions grew more frenzied, each one pushing her further into a darkness from which there was no return. Minutes passed like hours until finally Shaana collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Her hands were shaking, covered in blood. She looked at Tiana, her chest tightening with a sinking realization. Tiana lay motionless on the floor, her body bruised and lifeless. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Shauna's ragged breathing. The weight of what she had done hit her all at once. She let out a guttural sob, her body racked with grief and guilt. "Tiana," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What have I done?" In her haze of shock and despair, Shaana reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was calm, detached, as if the enormity of her actions hadn't fully registered. 911, "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "I just killed my daughter," Shaana replied, her words chillingly flat. The operator tried to gather more information, but Shaana offered no further explanation. Her silence was heavy, broken only by her shallow, uneven breaths. Within minutes, officers arrived at the modest house on the outskirts of Atlanta. The scene they walked into was one of horror. The front door was ajar, and the faint metallic tang of blood hung in the air. Inside, Shaana sat on the living room floor, her hands crimson and her face a mask of grief. Tiana's lifeless body lay just feet away, a heartbreaking testament to the violence that had unfolded. Marcus Bailey, who had been out running errands, returned to the flashing lights of police cars and the whispers of horrified neighbors. He feigned shock and sorrow, playing the role of the grieving partner. But as investigators began to piece together the events, they would uncover the truth about his manipulation and the role he had played in the tragic downfall of the Ellis family. The days following the tragic death of Tiana Ellis were a whirlwind of investigation, grief, and mounting questions. The case that initially seemed straightforward, a mother snapping in a fit of rage, soon unraveled to reveal a far more sinister web of manipulation and betrayal. Detectives arrived at the Ellis home that same day, greeted by the haunting image of Shaana Ellis sitting motionless on the floor, her hands stained with her daughter's blood. She offered no resistance as officers placed her in handcuffs and led her away. Outside, neighbors whispered in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the kind, hard-working mother they thought they knew with the horror that had unfolded behind closed doors. As Shaana was taken into custody, Marcus Bailey arrived, his face painted with an expression of shock and grief. He was quick to position himself as the grieving partner, expressing sorrow over Tiana's death, while insisting he had no idea what could have driven Shaana to such an act. "She must have snapped," he said to investigators. "She's been under so much stress lately." But Marcus's performance didn't fool everyone. Detective Angela Carter, the lead investigator assigned to the case, immediately noticed inconsistencies in his story. A seasoned professional, with years of experience uncovering hidden truths, Carter had an uncanny ability to see through facades. Her suspicions deepened as she delved into the Ellis family's history. Detective Carter's team began piecing together the events leading up to Tiana's death. They interviewed neighbors, co-workers, and Tiana's classmates, uncovering a disturbing pattern of behavior. Tiana's close friend revealed a heartbreaking secret. Tiana had confided in her about Marcus's inappropriate actions and her growing fear of him. Text messages on Tiana's phone corroborated her friend's account, detailing Marcus's threats and coercion. Physical evidence further bolstered their case. Medical reports confirmed Tiana's pregnancy, and forensic analysis revealed injuries consistent with prolonged abuse. Marcus's carefully constructed facade began to crumble as the weight of evidence against him grew. Under pressure from investigators, Marcus's mask of innocence slipped. When confronted with the evidence, he attempted to shift the blame entirely onto Tiana, claiming she had seduced him, a vile and transparent attempt to deflect responsibility. His manipulative nature, once so effective, now worked against him as the detective saw through his lies. Shaana, meanwhile, remained in custody, consumed by guilt and despair. Her initial confession was simple: "I killed my daughter." But as Detective Carter pressed for details, a deeper and more complex story emerged. Shaana recounted how Marcus had manipulated her, planting seeds of doubt about Tiana's intentions and driving a wedge between mother and daughter. Her voice cracked with regret as she admitted, "I believed him. I let him make me doubt my own child." Detective Carter's findings painted a chilling picture of Marcus Bailey's predatory behavior and the toxic dynamic he had fostered within the Ellis household. It became clear that Tiana's death was not the result of a single moment of rage, but the culmination of years of abuse, manipulation, and misplaced trust. The case against Marcus was damning. He was charged with statutory rape, coercion, and a litany of other offenses related to his abuse of Tiana. As he awaited trial, the full extent of his crimes came to light, shocking even the most jaded members of the community. Shaana, too, faced justice for her role in Tiana's death. Her trial was a painful and public reckoning, as prosecutors argued that while she was a victim of manipulation, her actions that day were ultimately her own. Her defense team pleaded for leniency, citing her remorse and the psychological toll Marcus's abuse had taken on her. But the court could not overlook the fact that Shaana's misplaced rage had cost Tiana her life. In the end, Marcus Bailey was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shaana was sentenced to 25 years for manslaughter, a punishment that she accepted with a quiet resignation. "I failed my daughter," she said during her sentencing. "I let my own pain blind me to hers. There's nothing I can do to bring her back, but I'll carry the weight of what I've done for the rest of my life." The tragedy of the Ellis family sparked national conversations about abuse, manipulation, and the failures of social systems to protect vulnerable individuals. Advocates called for greater awareness of the signs of abuse and more resources to help those trapped in toxic relationships. For Detective Angela Carter, the case was a haunting reminder of the devastating impact of betrayal within families. "Tiana's story is one we can't forget," she said in an interview. "It's a reminder of the importance of listening, of believing, and of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves." The story of Shaana and Tiana Ellis did not end with the courtroom verdicts. Their tragedy left a scar not only on their community, but also on the broader conversation about abuse, manipulation, and the silent battles that many families endure behind closed doors. Tiana's death became a symbol of the devastating consequences of unchecked manipulation and betrayal. Advocacy groups rallied to her memory, using her story as a powerful example of why awareness and education about abuse are essential. Campaigns were launched to encourage people to recognize the signs of predatory behavior and to speak up when they suspected someone they knew might be in danger. Tiana's Law, a proposed piece of legislation aimed at improving protections for minors in abusive households, gained traction in the wake of the case. For Shaana, life in prison became a time of painful reflection. Stripped of the illusions and lies that had once blinded her, she confronted the depth of her guilt. In letters to family and even in interviews from her cell, she spoke candidly about the choices she had made and the consequences of her actions. "I failed the one person I was supposed to protect the most," she wrote in one letter. "I believed someone who didn't deserve my trust, and I turned my back on my daughter when she needed me." Despite her remorse, Shaana struggled with the reality that she could never undo the harm she had caused. She participated in therapy programs and spoke with counselors who helped her unpack the years of emotional vulnerability that had made her so susceptible to Marcus's manipulation. Yet no amount of introspection could erase the pain of losing Tiana or the role she had played in her daughter's tragic end. The impact of the Ellis case reached far beyond their Atlanta neighborhood. Discussions about domestic abuse and manipulation surged on social media, with many sharing their own stories of surviving toxic relationships and pleading for better resources for victims. Experts emphasize the need for communities to be vigilant, to believe those who spoke out about their fears, and to take action before it was too late. Detective Angela Carter, who had tirelessly worked to uncover the truth of the case, became a vocal advocate for change. In interviews and public appearances, she shared the lessons learned from the Ellis tragedy. "We need to listen when someone says they're uncomfortable," she said during a community event. "We need to ask questions, to notice the signs, and to step in when something feels wrong. Silence and inaction are what allow predators to thrive." The courtroom sentences brought a sense of closure to the case, but not to the pain it left behind. Marcus Bailey, once a master manipulator, now lived in the stark reality of a life sentence, his freedom stripped away along with his facade. Shaana, while serving her 25-year sentence, carried the crushing weight of her choices, her dreams of happiness reduced to ashes. And then there was Tiana, a bright, empathetic teenager whose life was cut short by the very people who should have protected her. Her memory became a rallying cry for change, a reminder of the importance of vigilance, trust, and accountability in protecting the vulnerable. The house where the tragedy unfolded eventually stood empty, its walls holding the echoes of a family fractured by lies. For neighbors and community members, it served as a haunting reminder of what had happened there, a symbol of a story no one would ever forget. In the end, the Ellis case forced a reckoning with hard truths, that love can blind, that manipulation can destroy, and that silence can be deadly. It urged people to listen more carefully, to question what they see, and to act when someone cries out for help. The tragedy of Shaana and Tiana Ellis serves as a heartbreaking reminder of the devastating consequences of silence, manipulation, and misplaced trust. Their story is not just a cautionary tale, it's a call to action. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please don't stay silent. Resources and support systems are available to help those in need. Whether it's reaching out to a trusted friend, contacting a local advocacy group, or calling a hotline, there is always someone ready to listen and provide assistance. For those who suspect that someone they know may be in danger, remember that your vigilance can make all the difference. Learn to recognize the signs of abuse and manipulation, and don't hesitate to act if you believe someone is at risk. Speaking up could save a life. We owe it to Tiana and to countless others like her to ensure that their stories lead to change. Let this case be a reminder of the importance of protecting the vulnerable and holding abusers accountable. Together we can create a world where no one has to suffer in silence. If this story has moved you, please take a moment to share it with others. Raising awareness is the first step toward preventing tragedies like this from happening again. And if you haven't already, subscribe to True Crime Intel for more in-depth explorations of the human stories behind the headlines. In memory of Tiana Ellis, 2006 to 2023, a bright young life taken too soon. May her story inspire us all to be vigilant, compassionate, and unyielding in the fight for justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters.